prison record exists in Texas that officials still struggle to explain. 4 separate escapes. 4 times the system caught a man. 4 times it locked him behind reinforced steel. 4 times he walked out, not by force, not with a weapon, not through a tunnel dug over years. He walked out using nothing but his mind. He impersonated a federal judge from a prison payphone. He faked his own death and mailed the death certificate to the very authorities searching for him. He put himself into a voluntary coma, 4 days unconscious, just to convince doctors he was dying. And each time, the United States correctional system believed him. This is the story of Stephen J. Russell, and this is Dark Chapter. Stephen J. Russell was born on a Saturday in 1957 in the state of Virginia. His birth mother, Georgia, was a single woman who made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She gave him up for adoption. He went to Brenda and Thomas Russell, a middle-class couple in Chesapeake, Virginia. A stable home, a loving one. They never wanted Stephen to know, but when he was 9 years old, the truth found him anyway. Child psychology research, including work published by the American Academy of Pediatrics, tells us that when a child learns of adoption without preparation, the cognitive disruption can be profound. The child doesn't just lose a story, they lose the entire framework through which they understand themselves. For Stephen, that disruption became behavioral. He fought at school. He acted out. And then, at an age when most children were worried about homework, he committed arson. Brenda and Thomas did what they believed was right. They sent him to a juvenile reform facility. Here are the details the source records rarely highlight. Stephen Russell had an estimated IQ of around 160. That places him in the same cognitive tier as John Stuart Mill at that age, the same range as Richard Feynman by self-report. In other words, the system sent an extraordinarily gifted mind to a place designed for correction. What it got instead was education. On Friday the 13th of May, 1971, Stephen Russell made his first ever escape. He simply walked away from the reform facility, and he chose to remember that date, Friday the 13th, for the rest of his life. Not as bad luck, as his personal symbol of freedom. That detail tells you everything about how this man's mind was wired. After the escape, something unexpected happened. Stephen Russell went straight. He joined law enforcement. In Chesapeake, Virginia, he served as a reserve sheriff's deputy. His colleagues described him as diligent, rule-following, a man who genuinely believed in the system. The real reason he joined, however, was deeply personal. He wanted to find Georgia, his biological mother. The databases, records access, the network, law enforcement gave him all of it. He found her. And what happened at that reunion is one of the most quietly devastating moments in this story. Georgia didn't embrace him. She sent him away. She had moved on. She had no interest in Stephen's existence. He had spent years building toward that moment. What he found was a closed door. He moved forward anyway. In 1976, he married the secretary to the police chief, a woman who knew him, respected him. They had a daughter, Stephanie. To all appearances, the life of Stephen Russell was completely normal. But Stephen was gay. He had known since adolescence. The era made concealment a survival skill. In 1985, when his adoptive father Thomas died, the man Stephen described as his emotional anchor, the loss broke something open. He told his wife the truth. She didn't explode. She didn't leave in anger. She said she appreciated his honesty. They divorced amicably. They stayed in contact. He moved to Texas, and for the first time in his adult life, Stephen Russell began to live without a mask. That freedom came at a cost. Here's the question I want you to sit with. A man is repeatedly denied employment. not for incompetence, but purely because of his sexuality. At what point does a society's refusal to integrate someone become a factor in the crimes they commit? Think about that. Drop your answer in the comments. Because what happens next makes that question impossible to ignore. This is Dark Chapter. In Texas, Stephen Russell tried the legitimate path. He was fired from multiple jobs, not for poor performance, but because employers discovered he was gay. This was the late 1980 seconds. The social climate was specific, brutal in many workplaces. So he adapted. He began committing insurance fraud, staged slip and fall accidents, deliberate traffic collisions, small cons growing larger. He sold counterfeit Rolex watches. He constructed layered false identities. Then he met Philip Morris, and everything changed.
They fell into each other's lives immediately.
They moved to Palm Beach together. They ate at expensive restaurants. They lived, in Stephen's words, the life they deserved. The problem was funding it. When Philip was diagnosed with what appeared to be HIV, at a time when an HIV diagnosis was effectively a death sentence, given that protease inhibitor combination therapy wouldn't become standard until 1996, Stephen's entire operational tempo shifted. The petty cons were no longer enough. He needed resources. He needed proximity to Philip, and he needed them now. In 1992, police arrested Russell for fraudulent documentation. 6 months they gave him. He spent those 6 months studying at the prison. Within 4 weeks of arrival, he had memorized guard rotation patterns. Guards broke every 3 hours for cigarettes, a vulnerability consistent with what penologists call routine activity gaps in facility security. He sourced plain civilian clothes and a hand radio from inside the facility. And on May 13th, 1992, Friday the 13th, Stephen J. Russell walked out of a Texas prison for the first time. He went directly to Philip. 3 days later, he was back in custody. The second arrest came fast, another insurance fraud charge, back inside. But this time, Stephen Russell did not plan a physical escape. He picked up a prison payphone. He called the jail's own records office. He introduced himself as the judge overseeing his case, a real judge whose name and docket Russell had memorized in advance. He told the female clerk that Russell's bail had been reduced from $9,500 to $5,000. The clerk hesitated. Russell had prepared for that too. He had studied the judge's case history. He knew specific details about the case. He modulated his voice, not just in pitch, but in rhythm, in cadence, in the measured authority of a man who does not repeat himself. The clerk updated the records. Russell then worked on the phones again, this time persuading a bond company to cover the reduced bail. He walked out, legally, through the front door. Using paperwork he had fabricated from a prison payphone with no tools, no computer, no confederate, only his voice and a plan. Forensic linguists have since studied his methods. What Russell demonstrated is a near clinical application of what social engineers call authority bias exploitation, the human tendency to comply with perceived institutional power. He didn't need a weapon. He just needed to sound like someone you don't question. The third escape was more elaborate and more dangerous. After rearrest and a 40-year sentence, Russell was transferred to a high-security Texas facility with round-the-clock CCTV coverage and guards trained specifically to watch him. He found a gap. The prison had an internal medical unit, separate from the cell blocks, where doctors and staff moved freely. Their clothing was a specific pale green. They were waved through checkpoints. They were not questioned. Russell dyed his own prison clothes to match that exact shade. On the morning of December 13th, 1996, a Friday, at approximately 4 a.m., A female guard was on her usual phone call, a routine Russell had clocked over weeks. During that window, he moved through the medical wing in his recolored clothes and walked out of a maximum security Texas prison in the dark. He knocked on a stranger's door. He said he was a surgeon from the Texas Medical Center. Car trouble. Needed a ride. The homeowner drove him to a nearby town. A taxi took him further. He didn't pay for either of them. He was eventually tracked to Biloxi, Mississippi, where a local sheriff's deputy recognized his face from a photo circulated weeks earlier. Pure chance. Wrong place, wrong moment. Back in custody. 5 more years added. Now 45 years total. The 4th escape is the one that defies ordinary understanding. By this point, Texas authorities had placed Russell in conditions described by prison reform advocates as administrative isolation. 23 hours a day in his cell, 1 hour for exercise, no peer contact. His movements were logged, his mood was monitored, his interaction was on camera. Stephen Russell looked at that environment and decided to die. Not literally. Officially. First, he starved himself for months. His weight dropped dramatically. Guards noticed. Medical staff were called. Here is where his preparation paid off. He had already, quietly, bribed a lab technician. His blood work came back HIV positively. The diagnosis unlocked a compassionate release provision, a real Texas Department of Criminal Justice policy that allowed terminally ill inmates to be transferred to external care facilities. But Russell wasn't finished.
He had been hoarding sedative pills for months,
collecting them from his medical doses instead of swallowing them. He consumed a massive quantity deliberately. He induced a 4-day coma. Doctors at the care facility in Kennedy, Texas were convinced he was dying. His parole transfer was approved. From the care center, Russell then called prison administration, impersonating an FBI agent this time, and instructed staff that he was released from custody. Then he faxed his own fabricated death certificate to the jail, the care center, and his supervising officers. The system buried him. He was already 3 states away. He was caught again in April 1908, arrested in a Florida hotel lobby, on his way to attempt a $75,000 bank loan using a fabricated identity. The court sentenced him to 144 years, 99 for the escapes, 45 for fraud. He was placed in solitary confinement. For 16 of those years, he had almost no human contact. On July 16, 2024, after 26 years, Stephen J. Russell was released. He spent his first day of freedom with Lawrence Watts, co-author of the memoir written with Russell's cooperation. Jim Carrey played Stephen in the 2009 film I Love You, Philip Morris, alongside Ewan McGregor as Philip. The real Philip Morris, it was later confirmed, was never actually HIV positive. The illness was fabricated. Both playing the same long con for different reasons. Here is where Dark Chapter leaves you with a question that has no easy answer. Stephen Russell never killed anyone. He never threatened violence. In 26 years of incarceration, he hurt no one physically. He defrauded corporations, manipulated institutions, and made the state look foolish. Was 144 years justice? Or was it a system protecting its ego? Tell us where you stand in the comments. If this chapter stayed with you, subscribe to Dark Chapter. Hit the bell, because the next chapter you will not see coming. This was Dark Chapter. Stay curious, stay sharp.